Hi everybody, welcome back to part 3 of this, which is the Border Models 132 scale Lancaster build. Just a bit of a recap from parts 1 and 2, because these are quite far apart, these episodes. I'm only doing this on and off whilst I've got the projects on the bench. So in part 1 I built the cockpit, and in part 2 I went back to do the navigator station and the radio operator, and I also prepared this part, which is the starboard forward part of the cockpit, which has the flight engineers panel on it, and this is what I'm going to be concentrating on for this episode. I want to get this finished and installed like that, roughly, to enclose the whole forward fuselage. But what I'm going to do as well is a little bit of work on the bomb bay, which are these two large parts, and that's because there's a tricky fit to be had of the bomb bay into the underside of the cockpit floor, and I've had a heads up about the difficulties of installing this when Border tell you to later on in the instructions. It's going to be pretty impossible to do it at that stage. So I'm going to fit the floor now at the end of this episode. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But first of all, I want to do the work on this starboard section. And I think we'll start by doing the flight engineers panel here. I've prepared this already with some gloss black, ready for some decals. So that's the first step. Let's make a start. One thing I hadn't noticed about the decals is that they're all separate pieces. You can see them all moving around. And the other thing you've got to look out for is there's a very thin line around the outside, which has a tendency to fragment and go all over the images, so that's not great. So we're going to have to take care with this. Actually, that one's quite a big section, so we'll leave that on the sheet. We'll get the rest of the images off and onto the model. Now, unfortunately, these have broken up. I don't know whether it's because they're old, but they're going to need a lot of touching up, which is a shame. So I'll get them on as best as I can, and as I said, we'll just have to touch in the details with some paint. On reflection, it might have been better to paint this anyway, because these decals really are not performing very well at all. They're very thin, but once they start breaking up, there's very little you can do to sort them out. They're just fragmenting into tiny little pieces. An alternative would be a photo etch overlay for the panel, which would work, I think. But I'll persevere with what's provided in the kit, see what we can make of it. So that's as close as I'm going to get them, I think. they're too delicate to mess around with, so I'll cut my losses, I think, and just let those settle, and hopefully we'll just be able to touch in the brakes and it won't look too bad when it's done. With the engineer's panel all dry, I've done the touch-ups and the repairs, so it looks okay now. It's a shame about the decals giving way though, but we're going to do some detail painting now, and I'm going to be using this Citadel colour, one of my favourite paints for detail painting, just to pick out the lovely mouldings on the kit. I just thin these down with a little bit of water. I can't say exactly how much, it's just, you need to just experiment with it. But if you just let it down with some water, they go on really nice and smooth. These mouldings that I'm picking out now appear around the cockpit at each station, and they were the oxygen selectors for each crew member. I'll give these a coat of varnish once I've done all the painting with the brush, and that just helps level off the finish. It just removes any little brush marks or things like that. The other nice thing with these Citadel paints is that you can mix them, obviously. They're really easy to mix, and bearing in mind that people really use them for miniature painting, figures, with the folds in the clothing and so on. So just taking advantage of that ability, we can just add a little bit of highlighting to these pipes and cables. So I've just got a little bit of white added to the base colour, and just put a little highlight on the pipe. Now the reason I'm just highlighting this a little bit, just to exaggerate the shape, is that although the transparency parts for the canopy are pretty clear on the kit, you do tend to lose a bit of definition through the transparency. So that exaggeration, if you like, just brings the detail back a little bit. The moulding here that I'm just picking out is actually the breakout axe for smashing the transparency, and I'm doing it, but I think actually it will get covered by the flight engineer's folding seat which goes in front of it, but you might just catch a glimpse of it. So I'm assuming that's a canvas sleeve, if you like. So with the detail painting done, I'm happy with how that looks now. So I'll get a coat of semi-gloss on these panels where I've added the decals, and then I'll just pick out the instrument faces with some Tamiya lacquer gloss clear. This is the flight engineer's seat, and in this case we've got the version of it being stowed, so it goes in this sort of position, folded up against the side bulkhead. The kit also provides an alternative part for the seat in the deployed position, and in that position the flight engineer sat next to the pilot on his right hand side, with access to the throttle controls to help the pilot on takeoff, landing and so on. We also get this, which is a backrest. Really, it's just a leather strap which attached to the pilot's seat, just to give a backrest for the flight engineer when this seat was in the deployed position. So we'll fit that later on. These brass belts have been annealed when I used them previously for the rest of the crew stations, so we can fold this up a little bit, get a bit of animation into it. Okay, I've checked the instructions and I'm okay at this point to attach this starboard panel. There's quite a positive fit all the way along with tabs and slots, so we should be able to get it accurately positioned. Now, keen to get this nice and tight because my test fits suggest that there's not a lot of clearance on these assemblies, and I don't want to run out of manoeuvring room when I come to attach the main fuselage. Okay, so coming back to the bomb bay, which I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that's these two large mouldings. I want to get these assembled, these two parts, and the whole assembly attached to the underside of the cockpit floor. And that's because I don't think it's going to be possible, or at least easy, to get this fitted when Border want you to much later on in the build. In fact, I'm deviating really from the way Border suggests you put the kit together, because I have read reports that it's not actually possible to join the forward section of the fuselage and the main rear section of the fuselage the way that Border would have you do it. So the first step in that alteration to the build sequence, if you like, is to get this bomb bay fitted. So the first job is to assemble the two main components. There are a very positive location for them. So I'll just run some extra thin into the join. On this kit, the components are a bit warped actually, so I'm just going to have to clamp it together until the glue's dried. So just work along, make sure all the locating pins are engaged as we go along, and hopefully that'll straighten the assembly out a little bit. Okay, so I'll leave that bound up, let it dry, and then we'll get it attached to the cockpit floor. Okay, so that's dried, it's nice and solid. Still got a warp in it, unfortunately, but hopefully when all these tabs are inserted, it should straighten the whole of the bomb bay roof out. Hopefully, anyway. So now I want to attach this large roof assembly onto the cockpit floor. And you can see what the problem would be here later on. We've got a slot here that engages here, and this fairly large box and two more ribs which fit into these mouldings here. So you've got to be pushing the bomb bay roof forward to engage underneath these two tabs that I mentioned earlier on, whilst at the same time getting those slots and boxes engaged properly. So it's easy enough at this stage, but I think it will be pretty tough later on. So this is a step that I'm taking well before Border tell us to, as I mentioned. They would have you assemble the bomb aimer's compartment and the forward fuselage outer shells, if you like. and then the bomb bay, and then the rear part of the fuselage. And I think that's fraught with difficulty. So I'm hoping that I've got this right. On the plus side, I can't see any reason why it will obstruct the assembly later on. It can only help, I think. So let's get that glued in. The other thing about actually using cement when you come to do these assemblies is that it acts as a little bit of a lubricant, so it enables these parts to slot in a little bit more easily than a dry fit would, for example. I want a really nice bond with this, so let's get plenty of cement on. Again, make sure we've got this nice and tight. I'll strap it up well. Okay, so that's gone together okay. I've got to where I wanted to be at the beginning of the episode. Cockpit substantially finished, just got the bomb aimers section to do. And importantly, I've got this bomb bay roof joined without any problem. So that's all good. In the next episode, I will be going back to the assembly sequence and doing that forward bomb aimers position. And I'll also do a test fit of the entire fuselage just to make sure that that's all going to go together as I hope it will. So that'll be coming up probably in another couple of weeks. I'll alternate the Lancaster build with the 132 scale Tornado that I've also got on the bench. So Tornado next week and Lancaster the week after. I've also got some work to do for my Patreon channel. With a couple of builds over there, a Phantom and a Mitchell. And you might have caught that I've also got a bit of a diversion build going on with Airfix's new 148 scale Bulldog. I've just got that in some paint, and I'll hopefully be applying some decals to that, ready for the second and final part of that build in the next week or so. So thanks for joining me for this one, everybody. I hope for those of you that are building or contemplating building the Lancaster, the Border Lancaster, the video series is useful for you. Hopefully I've not led you astray with this assembly sequence. I hope not. Time will tell. Maybe you want to just hang fire a bit until I manage to do that test fit of the fuselage before you commit to the same sequence. I'd hate to be responsible for you trashing £600 plus kits. So anyway, we'll catch up pretty soon, one way or another, with one of the builds on the bench. In the meantime, look after yourselves, everybody. See you soon. Bye for now.